In this one, what I wanted to do is give you kind of a short history of the electric car. Now, my history of it's got a little bit of a twist, maybe a little different than some others, but the electric car was developed about the same time as the electric motor. Now, that's about the mid-1800s. And of course, electric motors went through a lot of development in the 19th century. But they were recognized as a way to power all kinds of things, mostly stationary things, because something that was like an automobile, you didn't have a power source for it unless you had batteries. Well, batteries were invented about 1850. They were lead-acid batteries, and they're similar to lead-acid batteries today. The batteries then weren't developed quite as well as these, didn't have the energy density that the ones we have now, but the battery pretty much made the electric car practical. It's also been its highest limiting factor. Electric cars built in the late 1800s and early 1900s were actually more popular than gasoline cars. For one reason: you didn't have to start them. Now, a gasoline car, you had to crank start that thing. And it actually took an electric motor to make them practical. That was the starter, the electric starter. The electric car was very popular with people that did not want to try to start the car. That was by far the most popular car with women, because they didn't want to start that stupid car. The other things that were involved with electric cars that could make limitations: there was no real good way to control the speed of an electric motor. Most electric motors, you turn them on and that's it. And you have multiple speeds on a lot of motors, but they're switching from one speed to the next is kind of a problem. And the original electric cars, for the most part, wanted to just run the batteries full out all the time. You would just go. Now, there were accelerators that could put 2 batteries and 4 batteries and 6 batteries in, and there were switches that were used as, I don't think they used floor accelerators. You could change the speed that way, but it was jerky. It really wasn't very effective. So for the most part, they just simply had one speed. That speed was about 25 miles an hour, which was plenty fast enough when gasoline cars couldn't go any faster than that anyway. And they were primarily urban. You're not going to drive it, way out in the sticks, although, interesting, the range of those cars was anywhere from 50 to 80 miles. And we didn't really get past that until the last few years, because most of the electric cars out there ran anywhere from 65 to 80 miles on a charge, even now. So going back to the lead-acid batteries that were used, they were used for a very long time. And I believe even General Motors EV1 originally used, the first batteries were lead-acid. I may be wrong on that, but I believe it was. Well, we spent a lot of time not using electric cars when we got gasoline powered cars that had longer range, were faster, and the fuel they used was far more energy dense. Another thing that made a huge difference between gas and electric was the availability of gasoline. Now, the first gasoline cars, you bought the gasoline out of a 55-gallon drum at a hardware or a general store. So there wasn't a lot of availability of gasoline, and it was kind of a hassle to fill the car. Most people had electricity, If you're going to have an electric car, I guess you'd have to have electricity, but most urban households had electricity. So they had a way to charge the car when they were using it. But once Standard Oil decided to start putting in a whole bunch of gas stations, that made a huge difference. And gasoline cars took off. Well, about 1970, well, about 73 actually, I think. And dates, I'm not trying to be really picky on dates. This is mostly things I remember. So we had an oil shortage. Okay, oil embargoes, limited amount of oil was coming over here, and we had gas lines, we had all that sort of stuff. And about that time, electronics developed the pulse width modulator. Okay, that's a simple way of taking direct current and changing its effective voltage. We had no way to change the effective voltage for DC current. We could do it with AC, but we couldn't do it with DC. And so when we wanted to modulate the speed of an electric vehicle, we were faced with conditions that made it very hard to have a variable speed. Once the pulse width modulation came into being, we were able to actually do that. Now, they didn't work well in the 70s. There was a lot of development on that stuff. But eventually, they got to where they work. I actually converted a gasoline car to electric, and I bought a kit for a pulse width modulation controller, which worked absolutely beautifully in the car, and it was incredibly good. So the issue of varying speeds was more or less solved by that time. But we still had this problem with batteries. Lithium-ion came in, great batteries, ridiculously expensive. I can remember going to a local battery supplier, even telling them I'm going to buy a bunch of batteries, and them telling me a 100 amp hour 12 volt lithium-ion battery would cost me $1,400. Now I'd need 20 of them to make my car work. Obviously that was, $30,000 was not in the cards for that sort of thing. I used lead acid batteries in the conversion I did. So now what we have is finally these lithium-ion batteries, which are extremely energy dense compared to anything else I've used. They're very good. There's a lot of power packed in those. They have made these cars practical. We're over 200 miles on range now. I think we're probably going to peak out at about 300 miles on range. Some may go higher than that, but there's weight issues if you go too much higher. And so I think a 100 kilowatt battery is probably going to be about the top one we use. A little prediction there, we'll see if that comes out. But the time for the electric car is coming. They are practical. I'm driving one now, and I just sit there driving it and I'm amazed. I'm going hundreds of miles in this silly thing on the highway. I have to stop to charge, but no electric car would take me over 100 miles forever. They weren't there. There wasn't any way to make them work. You're going to see delivery vehicles going electric. All sorts of people movers, buses and the like are all going to be electric. Some of them already are and have been for a long time. All these things are coming due finally. So this is probably going to be the next couple of decades is going to be the electric car decades. Okay, that's it on this one.